Good morning and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Dave Deacon. And if you're planning out your fall breeding season for cows and heifers, there's a few things that you can do to increase pregnancy rates, and it comes down to nutrition. SUNUP's Kurtis Hair has more with Oklahoma State University Extension beef cattle specialist, Dr. Dave Lalman.
Well, it's about that time the producers are going to start thinking about breeding their fall heifers. And Dave, you actually have some data that shows that there's a correlation between the nutrition value and conception rates.
Yeah, I mean, the science, people working on that question have known we call it an interaction between nutrition and reproduction for many years. Dr. Wedeman spent his whole career on that. Dr. Selk talks about it all the time. But one of the specific things we thought we might cover for this session, with the breeding season coming up in the fall calving herds, is the ways to manage heifers through the breeding season so as to maximize conception rate.
So what are some of those methods?
Well, so one scientist in particular, Dr. George Perry at South Dakota State University, has done a lot of really good applied research looking at this question of what happens when you'd radically change the diet of a heifer around the time. In his case, most of their studies have been done with artificial insemination. And so he's got some good data on that topic.
So when it comes to, having them in a lot, having really good nutritional hay, and then turning them out, say on some some pastures that has some of that dead grass, how does that affect it?
And a lot of people would likely be in that situation. So they might have them up in a dry lot somewhere because they're, you can see them all. They might be heat checking through their AI program, or they might have had to run them through the chute several times for synchronization protocol. And so they've got them up in a dry lot. And then if they kick them out this time of year on dry winter pasture and a few pounds of cubes, whereas they had been getting a total mixed ration, maybe a higher TDN or higher energy diet, where they were gaining 1.5 pounds, maybe even up to 2 pounds a day, and now you kick them out on pasture and they're only gaining 0.5 pound a day, that's a pretty substantial change in their nutritional consumption or intake. And in those situations, that's where Dr. Perry's data shows that you do reduce AI conception rate by anywhere from 5 to 10%.
That's a lot. Now going through on the other end of this spectrum, where you have producers, might turn their cattle out on, some high nutritional values, such as like wheat. Yeah. How does that impact it?
Exactly the opposite, but exactly the same results. So what you want to do is try to maintain a relatively level of nutrition for about that 30-day period around the time of breeding or the beginning of the breeding season.
So when it comes to, we're talking about fall heifers and fall calving right now, but does the same thing apply to those, those spring calving operations?
It does, and a lot of his work have been with spring calving herds because, same situation. If you're coming out of winter, you might have been developing, depending on your resources, developing those heifers in a dry lot, and then you kick them out on lush early spring growth pastures. You pretty much got the same scenario of a radical change in their diet. And so, his data just suggests that it's better to try to maintain level nutrition for that critical time period.
So what's the, kind of the window where producers need to start thinking about
So,
this?
I'm a nutritionist, but my understanding is the critical time period there is once you get to 28 days post-breeding, that embryo is well implanted in the uterine wall, and so shouldn't be much of a concern after that period. It's that first 2 to 3 weeks after breeding or timed insemination, and most of the studies that have been done, kind of how they've been designed, it's that first 2 to 3 weeks that's a real critical period where you don't want those radical changes in the nutrition program.
All right, thanks, Dave.
Sure.
Dr. Dave Lalman, Extension Beef Cattle Specialist here at Oklahoma State University. And if you'd like some information for what Dave just talked about, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Hi, Wes Lee with the weekly Mesonet weather report. Cold and wet seem to be the weather conditions lately for most of Oklahoma. Due to this, wheat producers have been experiencing lackluster forage production for the last few weeks. To reinforce this, I thought we could focus on recent weather in the north-central region of Oklahoma, where wheat is a dominant crop. First, let's look at soil temperatures. On Wednesday morning, we see the 4-inch soil temperature was in the low 50s from Woodward to Newkirk. 1 year ago, we see almost the exact same conditions, at least in this region of the state. So a drop in forage production this fall cannot be blamed on just lower soil temperatures. Now let's focus on air temperatures. This graph shows the long-term average air temperatures with the blue fill line for wheat planted on October 1. The red line is the smooth average air temperature in 2018 and the yellow line for this year. It indicates about a 15-degree lower air temperature for the past 2 weeks. Another way to look at this is with degree days. At these 3 locations, wheat degree days are running about 20% less in 2019 versus 2018. Until air temperatures return to normal, expect wheat forage production to remain unimpressive. Gary is up next, showing the drought conditions in the southern Great Plains.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Now, let's going to start out with the drought monitor map. Since we don't have many changes for Oklahoma, I think we're going to go out and zoom out to see what's happening in Kansas and Texas as well. Well, as you can see, Texas is a mess of drought, especially across central, down into southern Texas, up into southwest Oklahoma. So our drought extends up from Texas and that area of the state, a little bit farther up into west central Oklahoma, but not drought right now, just abnormally dry conditions. And then we can see out across the western plains of Kansas, down into the Oklahoma Panhandle. We also have a bit of drought in that area. So a lot of the region is experiencing drought. So far, eastern Oklahoma and northern Oklahoma have missed out on the latest drought monitor maps. So let's hope that continues. We need to work some down into southwest Oklahoma and the Panhandle as well, though. Now, speaking of that rainfall, this is for the fall so far, so September 1st through November 5th. We do have a very good indication of why we have drought in southwest Oklahoma and the Panhandle, and not much in eastern Oklahoma. So we have over 20 inches of rain in some areas across the east, going down to about 7 to 8 inches in central Oklahoma, all the way down to less than an inch in the western Panhandle, and less than about 3 inches or so down in southwest Oklahoma. Now we look at that as part of the percent of normal map from the Oklahoma Mesonet for that same time frame. You know, all we have to do is look for the oranges and yellows, and pretty much the western half of the state shows below normal rainfall, at least for the fall thus far. But then we have the western Panhandle, which is really hurting, and in some cases down below 25% of normal rainfall over that time frame. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
The past few years have been hard on Oklahoma pecan growers, but this year shows promise for better yields. But it all comes down to the weather. SUNUP's Kurtis Hair takes us to northeast Oklahoma to meet a producer that's almost ready to start shaking trees.
Just if I had the chance, I'd be picking right now, but it's just too wet.
John Bennett is a pecan grower in Tulsa County. If there's been one constant theme throughout this growing season, it's been rain.
Yeah, this year's been really, really wet. It's been quite impressive to see the amount of water that's fallen up around Tulsa this year. The orchard out here, we've got about 55 acres total of planted trees. Only about 20 acres or so is going to be in production right now.
Every year has its challenges, but the amount of rainfall northeastern growers have faced is significant.
So many of those people just haven't been able to do their sprays and their management that they normally do, but they still have a crop, which is kind of amazing.
The trees love the water. Really, we love the water because we don't have to irrigate as much. But it comes with its challenges, definitely when you're spraying chemical and trying to get the fungicide down.
As it is known to do, the Oklahoma weather has thrown a curveball to growers throughout the state, dampening expectations for a bumper crop.
We average about 17 million pounds here in the state, and we were projected to maybe have 25 million. We haven't had really any little freezes along the way. We've had a lot of leaves hanging in the tree until just recently. The shake of the shakers when they're out here trying to get the trees out, or the nuts out of the tree, they just aren't falling because the leaves act as a dampener and keep the shake from having as much force.
The early October freeze impacted the crop in areas where the temperature dropped below 27 degrees, freezing the pecans that weren't ripe.
And so they won't open, and so they're not going to be any good. So they'll be stuck just like this, where they won't open up at all.
Another issue many growers face is wildlife.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we like to get out as soon as possible to harvest, especially these paper shells, is because we have a lot of wildlife that likes them just as much as we do.
Crows in particular can put a huge dent in yield potential.
This is crow damage, where they've just pecked holes into the shell, and they'll also take the nuts off. So one crow can take about 1 pound of nuts a day, and there's never just one crow.
Growers like John have unique ways of dealing with these pesky birds.
Of course, the squirrels will be out here all day long if you're not out here to run them off or scare them away.
Through all the rainy months and wildlife pressure, Mother Nature did give John a much-needed break at the right time.
This year we were fortunate. We got out about the 14th of October. We had about 7 days of dry weather, and we were able to get a bunch of production out of this orchard and harvested.
With 22,000 pounds harvested so far, it's the best year John's had in his 7 years as a pecan grower. He still has a few more rounds of shaking to get through, but, of course, there's more rain on the way, putting him back on the sidelines. Though he's still busy.
And so my days are spent out here running off the crows and the squirrels.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, joins us now. Kim, let's dive right in. What have we seen over the last month?
Well, we've seen prices inching up. You take wheat prices since early September, they were up 45 cents. They backed off just a little bit 2 weeks ago, and then they've recovered most of that loss. You look at corn prices were up about 40 cents. 2 weeks ago, they started down. They've got a slight downtrend. Soybeans gained 90 cents, but the good news is they're inching up. They're slowly, kind of like a snail, but they're moving higher.
We'll take it. What do you see moving forward? Any other changes or things to keep on the radar?
Well, it depends. You look at wheat, it's what's going on in Argentina, Australia, and Russia. Argentina, they were looking at a record wheat crop. They had some poor weather near harvest. They backed that off a little bit. Depends on how low that goes. You look at Australia, they're losing the third crop in a row. They lowered their production estimate about 30 million bushels this last week. And then you look at what's going on in Russia, and there's some major changes going on in Russia. Russia had missed out on the last 2 Egyptian wheat tenders. Russia's they've priced themselves out of the world market. And so what's happened, the Russian producer, they had heavy debt, they had tight cash flow, they had a limited amount of storage. Over the last few years, they paid down that debt. They've got cash now so that they don't have to sell at harvest, and they've got storage to store their wheat in. So in the past, Russians have sold most of their wheat. Now only about 50% of Russian crop this year has been sold, and only about 40% of that's been export. That resulted in higher prices. France underbid them, Romania underbid them, and so they missed out. And Ukraine underbid Russia, so they missed out on those sales. And you look at corn and beans, well, it's what's going on in Argentina and Brazil and those areas, what their production turns out to be, and uncertainty about U.S. corn production.
So in terms of the higher wheat prices in Russia, dive into that a little more. What's causing those higher prices?
Well, if you look at that again, it's the Russian producer is in a better financial position now, and they can afford to hold. They don't have to have that money at harvest to pay off their harvest cost and their debt. So they are more like the U.S. farmer now. They can store it, and when they do that, that raises the harvest price. That prices them out of the world market. But the bad news for us is they're going to be in that export market rather than being out of it in February, March. They're going to be in it next spring. So it's giving us slightly higher prices now, but it's going to be slightly lower prices as we get into late winter and early spring.
As we continue to think about this, do you think it will impact Russian production in the future?
Well, higher prices could lead to higher wheat production, but I think what's going on right now is they're looking at corn production. The corn production's been increasing, and to a certain degree, soybean production. Also, Ukraine, they had record production this year, and they've offset a lot of Russian wheat on the export market. So there may be a slight increase in Russian wheat production, but I don't think so. I think they're going to concentrate in other areas.
Okay, Kim, keep us posted, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
As we're going into the further into the fall, early winter months, if we haven't already started feeding big round bales of hay, once we get some snow cover on the ground or an ice storm, certainly that hay feeding will begin. Questions arise then about how much hay do we need to have stored to take care of the winter needs of our beef cows that are going to calve next spring, and how much hay do we need to take out to the pasture at any given time in order for the cows to meet their daily requirements. Well, there's several things that are involved in making those calculations. First of all, I think we want to consider the size of the cows. Obviously, if we consider that we've got some normal sized beef cows in today's world, that generally means a pregnant cow is someplace around 1,200 pounds. Cows will consume in terms of how much hay each day depending upon hay quality. If it's a low quality hay, and by that I mean something that's certainly 6% crude protein or less, these cows voluntarily can consume only about 1.5% of their body weight each day. And that's just because it takes longer for that low quality hay to be broken down and digested by the rumen, and that's usually the hays that are going to need quite a little bit of supplementation. If they're consuming a higher quality grass hay, let's say something that's about 8% crude protein or better, now these cows can consume about 2% of their body weight voluntarily, just because the rumen can go ahead and break that down faster. There's faster turnover time, and they can consume more of that hay, and they need less supplementation. But let's use an example here of a 1,200 pound cow that's consuming that 8% crude protein grass hay. She can consume about 2% of it on a dry matter basis, and that means 100% dry matter, no moisture involved, about 2% of it every day. Well, 2% of 1,200 is 24 pounds. That grass hay, even though it looks dry to you, still contains about 7 to 10% moisture. So we have to calculate that. And so as we figure this as to how much hay that sheep can consume on an as-fed basis, it jumps up to about 26 pounds. That still doesn't include the fact that when we take that hay out, put it in one of our bale feeders, or just string it out on the ground, there's going to be wastage. And wastage will vary quite a little bit, from as low as we estimate about 6% in some of the best situations to as high as 20% or more. Let's assume we're just putting that in just a regular ring bale feeder, and it's going to be about 15% hay wastage. On top of the 26 pounds that she can consume, now we have to consider that as we take that out to the pasture, we're going to need 30 pounds of that actual hay in order to meet her needs. That's what we need to kind of calculate as we're figuring how much hay we need for these dry cows as they go through the winter before they calve. Once they calve and they're lactating cows, now their ability to consume this hay actually goes up because of the energy and protein needs they have to replace that's going out in milk. We can generally consider they'll consume about 2.6% of that quality hay on a voluntary basis as lactating cows next spring after they calve. Those lactating cows will need about 36 pounds when we consider the dry matter calculation as well as the hay wastage. So I realize that in a lot of cases we'll still depend on standing forage to provide part of the hay needs or the forage needs of these cows as we go through the winter. But if we're in a situation where our pastures are real short, or we have snow cover on the ground for a period of time, and all of the hay and forage that those cows are going to consume, we need to keep those numbers in mind so that we're getting the right amount of hay out to those cows to meet their needs, so that we can maintain body condition on them into and through the calving season, and then on into towards spring grass and the breeding season, so that we not only have a successful calving season this spring, we have a good breed back for those calves that we're going to expect the following year. I think that if you'll do some proper calculations, keep in mind the size of your cows. You'll want to probably weigh a couple of these big round bales if you have that opportunity, so that you know how much hay is in each bale, and then you'll have the proper amount of hay going out to the cows this fall and this winter. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
It was about a month ago that we had Larry on to talk about the tariff deal between China and the U.S. And Larry, there's been a lot of news between then and now. Where are we with the negotiations?
Well, it looked like we were on track to have a signing sometime in November. And basically what's occurred is that the signing that was supposed to take place among China and President Trump in Chile has been canceled, not because of anything China or the United States did, but because of public protests in the streets of Chile. And that's probably a good thing, because China got cold feet about the trade agreement, so there have continued to be trade negotiations on the side, and it looks like now we have come a lot closer to the Chinese being relatively happy with it. There's still some wrinkles in it, and they're trying to get those worked out.
Whenever all this does take place, do you think it'll impact the markets in 2019 or 2020?
Well, I think probably the immediate impacts have probably occurred. We're going to see the major impacts probably take place early in 2020. And remember that this trade deal is probably not going to come to final fruition until the president turns around and says, we want the American people in Congress to take a look at it.
And also in the past month, there's been some other news when it comes to U.S. policy, some great news on interest rates.
It really is. It's been a real shot in the arm. Just as Chile was announcing that they were canceling those meetings and agriculture kind of got concerned about maybe it not happening, right, that the Fed Reserve Chairman announced that they were lowering interest rates. And while some people may not think that matters to agriculture, it really is a big deal, because when interest rates are dropped, and this was maybe 0.25%, that means that our dollar gets weaker, and when our dollar gets weaker, it means that our goods here get relatively cheaper to the rest of the world, and so we export more. And we usually see a big bump in increased sales to the rest of the world. So whether or not we have a trade deal with China anytime soon, we'll be selling more to the rest of the world, most likely over the next several months, just because of that. So it's good news for agriculture.
And we'll take it. Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Larry Sanders, ag economist here at Oklahoma State University.
We want to get an update now on the status of Oklahoma land values with our colleague Roger Sahs, who is an extension specialist. And Roger, why don't we just kind of start in general where things stand lately?
Well, the land markets have been surprisingly resilient over the last, I would say, couple of years, and especially over the last couple quarters. You know, despite the fact that we're in a low commodity price environment, at least according to the Kansas City Federal Reserve Bank and also the USDA NAS, they have shown some sustained growth in those land markets in Oklahoma. I think one of the big factors that has provided some support to these markets is the fact that interest rates are still low by historical standards, even though they have increased over the last couple quarters. And then two, I think we still have some strong equity positions out there with many producers with their balance sheets. And as long as we can maintain those financial positions, I think those land markets will be a beneficiary of that.
So moving forward from here as we round out the year and kind of look ahead to 2020, where do you see things going?
Well, I see really more of the same. You know, with the cropland markets, I think that they will be moving mostly sideways just because of the low grain prices that we're experiencing at this current time and that we're expecting down the road. And then in the cow-calf markets, I think that we'll see a little bit more in terms of growth, maybe 3 to 5% for the remainder of the year. And then going into 2020, we're hoping for some better cow-calf returns in 2020.
For folks who want to learn more or dive in a little bit more, you have information available through Extension, right?
Yes, we do. We have a land value website available through our Ag Econ department for those individuals that are thinking about buying and selling in these land markets.
Right, just lots of information before you make those decisions.
That is right.
Okay, Roger, good to see you. Thanks so much. And for a link to the information that Roger mentioned, just go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Well, that does it for us this week on SUNUP. If there's something on the show that you'd like to learn more about, visit our website, sunup.okstate.edu. And while you're there, check out our social media. From the Magruder plots on the Oklahoma State University campus, I'm Dave Deacon. And remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.